welcome to another episode of EMDR with Alice. Today we're going to talk about how to understand blocks through the lens of the AIP model. So remember, the AIP model helps us understand this concept of how the past is showing up in the present. It also helps us understand how our system is always working to move towards adaptation and longs for that, actually. And so beginning to help understand that and understand how when blocks come up in a therapy session, two things are happening. One, the past is showing up in the present. And two, the system is trying to move towards adaptation. And so when we can begin to understand that and recognize that using the AIP lens, we can then clearly see what's happening in the session and make a decision that might best serve the client in that moment. So let's look at it first through that lens of how the past might be showing up in the present. So when a block is coming up in the session, blocks can come up in several ways. Blocks may come up in terms of blocking beliefs, which we've talked about on another episode, but we'll just talk about it briefly again here. Blocking beliefs are beliefs that got developed at the time of an incident that's now stored in a maladaptive way. And so when it comes up in the session through the context of how the past is showing up in the present, we are recognizing that the blocking belief that's here and present in the moment is connected to the memory. So beginning to understand that when a blocking belief is coming up in the moment in the session, it somehow got developed at the time of the memory development, and it's just stored in a maladaptive way in those maladaptive networks. And so we begin to work with it just like we would any part of the memory that comes up in our session and reprocessing by naming it, recognizing it, and recognizing how it was useful and helpful at the time of the incident. So another way that blocks can show up in a session might be specific behaviors or cognitions or thoughts or even emotions that can come up, but they just seem really big and unmoving. So let's talk about it from the context of a body sensation first. So let's say a body sensation comes up and it doesn't seem to move, and the client seems stuck or blocked in that body sensation. Every time you check in, they're still there. It's still present, or it's getting worse. So that represents a block for the client. And so we want to recognize, how is the past showing up right now in the present, and the client's system is trying to move towards adaptation. So that might invite me to take a moment and pause and notice that body sensation with the client and do maybe a somatic interweave that we actually talked about in the previous episode. So you can go back and listen to that episode to know specifically how could we work with that block using specifically a somatic interweave. Now, what about if the block it comes up is an emotion? I've had that happen with clients where there's a certain emotion that once that emotion gets triggered, it creates a block, and maybe they get out of their window of tolerance, or that emotion just doesn't seem to shift for them. And so again, if that's the case, we work with blocks using cognitive interweaves. And sometimes the cognitive interweave for an emotion might just be to highlight that emotion and where they're feeling it in their body in this present moment. I've talked about this on another episode, but when we're helping clients be present with an emotion that's here, again, remembering it's the past showing up in the present, one of the most powerful cognitive interweaves that we can do is providing a missing experience. So this is providing something in our session that maybe they didn't get at the time of the incident, but that they needed. And so that might clearly just be me, the therapist, representing kind of an authority figure in that session. So connecting to the present moment and an adaptation might look like me, the therapist, in the session, creating an invitation for them to feel that emotion as big and for as big as they need to, or as long as they need to. And so that's providing two missing experiences for them. One, permission to feel the emotion and be in it. And two, it provides them the opportunity and space to have someone present witnessing that emotion without any judgment. And so there's two pieces of missing information that's happening that the client's system can then grab onto and help them adapt to that and move to more adaptive information processing. And so that's what can happen when there's blocks related to emotion. And then sometimes there's cognitive blocks that, we've talked about it in forms of the blocking beliefs that can come up. Sometimes it can come up too in terms of like behaviors that clients may do in a session. So for example, a block might be that the client keeps, every time you check in, what are you noticing now? They keep saying nothing. You've probably had that client. They keep saying nothing. Or I don't know, maybe they say that. And so you might be like, what do I do? They seem to be so blocked around that. Well, this is where that principle of how is the past showing up in the present, right? How is this memory showing up right now in my session? Part of it. And so the first step I might do is just be curious and say, oh, I wonder if nothing was part of the memory. Or I wonder if noticing nothing is part of the memory. Or you might even offer a cognitive interweave of how is I don't know make sense in terms of this memory and what happened in this memory, And so helping them connect the present to the past helps them move into adaptation. Sometimes the block, again, is a behavior where they're overthinking. Or like a belief that might come up around like they have to get this processing thing perfect for it to work. And so those are real subtle, and those subtle blocks that come up feel like it's tied to the moment and the client in the session. But once we've activated the memory networks with phase 3, anything they say or do in that session is part of the memory network. And you can always believe that. So any block that's taking place, we can conceptualize it through the lens of the AIP and really recognize and understand that whatever they're saying and doing is actually part of the memory network. So if they're overthinking or you're getting a sense that they're really trying to get it right and they're kind of self-doubting this processing thing, like I'm not doing it right, or I don't think I'm getting it. If they're saying things like that when you check in, that's a block and it's part of the memory network, right? How is I'm not doing this right part of the memory? Or how is self-doubt part of the memory? How is the need to be perfect part of the memory? And so we can bring that in as therapists as a cognitive interweave to help connect them to the present moment and how the past is showing up in the present, and then continue with reprocessing. Some of that work, we can even pick up on some of those blocks, those tendencies in our prep work, and begin to highlight it and name it in our prep sessions. And so that we already begin to identify those patterns with the client so that it's easier to recognize when it happens when we get into phases 4, 5, and 6. Well, this is our episode today on how to work with blocks, just continuing to talk through that discussion. Blocks is a big part of EMDR processing, especially when working with complex trauma. And so we'll, I'm sure, have more episodes on this in the future. Hope you can join us next time. Thank you.